Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many people here this morning. I think I'll introduce myself very shortly. My name is Gabrielle Patrick. I've been a lawyer in the blockchain space for a couple of years. I believe our official chair has arrived, Richard, so I will pass it on to him.
Oh, hello. I'm Richard Levine. Apologies for running late, everyone. I'm the chair of the FinTech and Regulation Practice at Polsinelli, a national law firm in the United States of about 850 lawyers. I've been a FinTech lawyer since 1999 and focused on crypto since early 2011. And I'll turn it over to the rest of the speakers to introduce themselves.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Philip Young from the Gibraltar Blockchain Exchange, director of the Gibraltar Blockchain Exchange. And the GBX is launching a world-leading cryptocurrency exchange and token sale platform with the view of introducing best practices and a corporate governance framework to the token industry.
Hello, everyone. My name is Letitia Segler, and I'm an independent expert at the European Commission. I look at proposals and policies around disruptive innovation.
Hi everybody, I'm Brian Donegan from the Isle of Man Government. I'm Head of Ops for FinTech and Digital Innovation.
So we have 25 minutes to cover a topic that we could probably spend an entire day covering. So as the moderator, unfortunately, I'm going to exercise my prerogative that if anybody's giving more than a 2 or 3 minute answer, I'm going to have to ask you to stop. But the first question that I wanted to put to the panel is, what is the difference between a cryptocurrency and an ICO? Would anybody like to jump in and help walk us through that?
Sure. I would say that digital currency, I think everybody knows Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple at this stage. I think they're fairly well defined as digital currencies or cryptocurrencies using cryptography to create a currency on the internet. So it's the internet of money. An ICO is the creation of a token. So if I was to launch a ICO and call it Brian token, people can actually buy my Brian token and get access to my goods and services, but they would typically have to use Bitcoin to actually buy my token. That's it in very, very short order.
Yes, just to extend that from Brian. So one is a product and the other is a process. And in terms of the process, it's actually something that's interested many of the audience here. But if you look at myself, you're seeing here the result of a process of an ICO, very much older and very much wiser after 6 months being involved in our own token and being involved in the token market industry. So one is a product and the other is a process, neither of which are easy.
So we've seen in the media that countries are actually barring token offerings. We've seen South Korea, we've seen China. Is there such a thing as a utility token? Some people love to call what they're offering a utility token. Is there anything that actually is a utility token?
Yeah, I think if you look at the ICOs that, and I can only talk about the Isle of Man because it's the only one I know where we've had direct involvement with the process. So we would typically evaluate ICOs in the context of their utility or whether they're a security. So a security obviously is a financial services type of product. And so our regulator would determine whether an application was either a security or a utility. So if it's not a security, they would focus on the utility aspect of it in terms of whether you get access to the goods and services that are being proposed and offered by the applicant. That's the entity that's actually launching the ICO.
That's interesting because in the United States, the chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, a former very prominent securities lawyer, said in a speech recently that we've seen a lot of, at the SEC, we've seen a lot of people claiming what they're selling is a utility token. And he said, I haven't seen one yet that looks like it's not a security. So in the United States, it's a safe bet that if you're offering a token, the SEC is probably going to deem it a security no matter how much you try to claim it's a utility token.
Yeah,
No, I don't agree with that view at all. I think if you look at the context of the SEC opinion so far, they do actually recognize utility tokens, and they recognize that you could sell a token in exchange for some sort of user-based benefit. I don't agree with that opinion. And I think that that is something that has also been recognized here by the EFC. So in that extent, it's not new.
I would have to disagree then, because the United States Securities Exchange Commission, I've represented a number of firms that have been sued, and in every case, the SEC is going back to a case called Glenn W. Turner, which was a fractional interest in a cosmetic scheme, where the SEC said in 1972 that that was even a security. The Howey test that everybody loves to banty around in the United States was a fractional interest in an orange grove. You can try to argue that something's a utility token, but you're more than likely going to be calling me to help defend you in an enforcement action if you do. Because the SEC's basis of jurisdiction is that something is a security, and if they think it is, they're going to go after you, and then they'll let you litigate it through the courts in order to prove that it's not. So hypothetically, yes, you can try to claim something's a utility token, but I would not advise it in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's probably the story of 2018, the developments of what the SEC do with looking back over the last couple of years with security raises or token raises in the United States, what they do to actually come after the people that they believe have been actually selling unlicensed securities. It's going to be a big story for 2018, that regulatory development, and how that leaves the US in terms of a market for raising capital, I don't know. But maybe, as we progress, that in time, the distinction between security tokens and utility tokens will no longer exist. They'll just be tokens. But at the moment, there is a need to have an obsession to create this classification between the two. I think the short answer to your question of whether the utility tokens exist, in my book, yes. In the SEC's book, probably not. But there is a bigger world outside of the US. But for the time being, it is what it is.
I think, Rick, just in that context, the Howey test is the definitive litmus test for a lot of applications in terms of whether they're utility or whether they're not. From our perspective, when we come across an applicant that we have a question mark over, and if it fails the Howey test and it is a proper security, then we would then have a sidebar conversation, or the regulator would have a sidebar conversation with that applicant in relation to collective investment schemes. So there's probably a second strand to the process as far as we're concerned as a jurisdiction. So we would still determine if the business is still worthy of engagement and investment, but we would ask the regulator to have a parallel regulatory process. One will be for the ICO and another one for the collective investment scheme. So it acts as a sort of a dual safety measure, if you like.
Well, and I don't want to focus only on the SEC being the American coming to Britain. I know that always annoys my friends here. If you had to pick a jurisdiction that was, let's say, more open-minded about a utility token or an ICO that is not a security or an investment contract or investment scheme, what jurisdiction would you pick?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I have a natural bias, but from our perspective, I think we spend a lot of time looking at the quality of the white paper, but we also spend probably a disproportionate amount of time on the caliber of the dev team. And we go into a lot of depth because we know that in the ICO space there are a lot of there's a lot of criminal activity, there's a lot of negative press, and it's there for a reason. So we have a vested interest in making sure that we filter everything to the fullest extent. And so whether it's a security or whether it's not is one issue, but a far greater issue for us is what quality is the white paper. And what quality is the dev team. Spend a lot of time with that.
Letitia and Gabrielle, what do you think?
I would actually pick Slovenia, interestingly enough. Slovenia, little country in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, because I think at state level they're really making some advancements. It's not only private companies that are entering into tokens and ICOs, but also they're implementing that in terms of ID and verification. So it's a small country, 2 million population, but I think it's a good testing ground in terms of getting your ICO project out there and actually implementing that at state level as well.
Any others?
I think the UK is a jurisdiction that I think has been very open to innovation, especially in the recent past. I'm not too clear on how Brexit affects that drive, but my impression of them is that they are quite open to the concepts of token distributions and utility tokens. My view is that regulation, like everything else, is a business, and so there are many jurisdictions looking to obtain and acquire that business. One of the jurisdictions that I'm aware of that is aggressively pushing for that niche of market is Bermuda. Bermuda has made open statements of trying to become a cryptocurrency haven, and my interaction with them suggests that they are actively attempting to acquire token distribution companies.
I'd also include Singapore. The reason I would include Singapore, I think for a country of its size, it is punching far above its weight. It has been extremely active in providing guidance. They actually published a paper helping people understand how something could be a token or something could be a security or an investment product. And I think that they are also very open with their sandbox, their regulatory sandbox, to a dialogue with the industry. The only issue is that it's a very small country, and if you're looking to sell your token or your tokenized security into a country like China or the United States or South Korea, for example, being based in Singapore and doing the offering from a Singaporean entity may not help you.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think if we're looking at supportive regulators in countries around the world, they're few and far between, and sometimes it feels like they're shrinking. So I think of the handful, as Richard said, Singapore and the MAS, Japan, they're very open, very flexible. But in terms of flexibility and open-mindedness elsewhere, you have to look at maybe Switzerland to a certain extent. Please don't forget Gibraltar. I mean, Gibraltar itself is even smaller than some of the countries mentioned here, but they're one of the first countries, first governments, first regulators in the world to introduce a framework, and a regulatory framework. The distributed ledger technology framework came into effect in January this year, and something that the world is looking at, including Bermuda. Yes, throughout the year there'll be further developments. I think there'll be regulatory principles being applied to the ICO space as well this year. Another little jurisdiction that's punching above its weight. But these are the sort of jurisdictions that are taking global leadership, and the other regulators, such as the FCA, and others are again applying the sandbox approach, which is fantastic, and it's a long-term play. But for us, smaller jurisdictions, including the Isle of Man as well, we're all taking a leading part in trying to drive this industry forward, and that's what's required.
So one of the questions we've been bantering around as a panel is, what is the main incentive or blocker in startups migrating to or staying in any one jurisdiction? So if you wanted to base your business in the Isle of Man or Gibraltar or Singapore, what kind of problems or benefits do you potentially face?
I guess in the case of the Isle of Man, we were very early into the crypto space and the ICO space. Back in 2014, we started to see a lot of interest from crypto business, but that was predicated on the fact that in the previous 10 years, we'd established the jurisdiction as a center of excellence for e-gaming or gambling online, and it's currently 20% of our GDP. So when crypto started to happen in 2013-14, the crypto community were looking for a jurisdiction to call home. And so they arrived in some considerable numbers in the Isle of Man because they'd actually made up their mind that that was the place they wanted to be. But we didn't have an underlying regulatory framework to suit them, and we are a small jurisdiction, so we very, very quickly realized the opportunity and put in place a regulatory framework to suit the industry. And it was the Proceeds of Crime Act, which was the underlying 2008 regulation, which we amended to capture digital currencies for AML. And we introduced some secondary regulation around KYC. So we had a registration and oversight process for applicants that wanted to come in and set up digital currency exchanges. That regulatory framework was essentially, or that registration and oversight framework was essentially the same framework that ICOs latched onto when they started to happen in 2016. That's principally why we started, as a jurisdiction, started to get some traction with ICOs. We also launched the first AML compliant ICO in the world in January 2016. So we just naturally started to attract a lot of that business because of our pedigree.
So Gabrielle and Letitia, do either of you have a suggestion of where you would set up a business?
Yeah, I think you've really underpinned the basis that it's that regulatory engagement with businesses and that agility. And in terms of other countries where I see this trend, it's places like Estonia, the Netherlands, again, Slovenia, some of the smaller Balkan countries. And it really depends on where you want to be geographically. But if it's the Middle East, I would look at Dubai as well. And then, of course, Singapore and the UK as well. But I think it's really, that regulatory engagement, if you see that regulators in countries are engaging in dialogue as opposed to, just banning, certain activities, I think that's an indication that they're actually open for business and willing to work with participants in the market to actually develop a framework.
Yeah, I would have to say that I agree with every one of the panelists that having a dialogue with your regulators is key. And it sounds contrary. Most business people think, I don't want to see my regulator until I absolutely have to. And what you really want to do is develop a relationship with your regulators, have a dialogue, introduce them to your business, help them to understand what you're doing, because it's much better to find out early in your business if you're doing something that's going to raise their eyebrows or cause problems than when they show up with, in the United States, it's the guys in the blue and yellow jackets, the FBI, who come to arrest people. And I do have a client who was arrested as part of a token offering. We did not counsel on the token offering. We're advising him on his lawsuit after the fact. And I don't like getting calls from clients at 5 a.m. saying, I'm about to be arrested by the FBI. So I don't think you want that in any jurisdiction in which you're operating. So having a dialogue with your regulators is key.
Can I just add to that? I think the two, from a startup perspective, I think the two major points I would look at are regulatory engagement / ease of communication and banking. So if it takes me 1,000,000 years to get to the right person to explain what Bitcoin is, they're not really going to understand what my new hybrid innovative model is. So the jurisdictions which have been open, which have dedicated resources to understanding what new models and innovations are, those are the jurisdictions I'm going to go to because I could get my answer very quickly. And then, in my business, I don't have 6 months or a year to figure out whether I can or cannot do business in that jurisdiction. And I'm saying that from a personal experience whereby I tried to push one type of model in a particular jurisdiction, I wouldn't name which one, and that regulator definitely cost me my competitive edge. By the time they figured out that they didn't understand the model, my competitor had already launched and I was put at a disadvantage. The other point that I think is exceptionally important is banking. So even though some jurisdictions have, I think, made a genuine effort to push innovation and competition in the market, that effort, to my mind, is almost countermanded if I can't get a basic bank account. So maybe I'm fortunate to raise $50 million worth of Ether or in a token distribution, but if I can't cash those funds out, I'm constrained, in my opinion, as to what I can and cannot do with those funds.
Gabrielle is 100% correct. I completely agree. The two issues facing all of us here in the audience, one is getting regulatory certainty, and the other is even more basic, banking relationships. It's impossible sometimes, and it's a key challenge. And the jurisdictions that can crack that not only will attract business, but will retain it, which was kind of what your initial question was.
So I'm going to go off script here. In the United States, there was a proposal from the regulator of banks, the Comptroller of the Currency, to set up a fintech charter. And in America, we have divided government. Our Republicans and Democrats can't stand each other. But the one thing they agreed on was they both hated the proposal from the Comptroller of the Currency. So that means it's probably a good idea in my book. But the question I have is to the panel, do you envision anybody, whether it's an innovative startup company or an existing financial institution, saying, we will be the fintech bank. We will start banking crypto We will start banking Ether. We will start banking Bitcoin. We will start making loans in both, and we will accept them as collateral. Do you see that happening anytime soon?
It's happening now. The claims are there. And I think the problem that we're seeing is the vested interests at the moment are kind of preventing that from becoming a reality. But in my view, it will happen in time. But yeah, there are many opportunities there for someone who can crack that to offer those banking services. Now, whether they're the new breed of banks or existing banks, time will tell. But yeah, absolutely, that's one of the holy grails, I believe.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. I think late 2018, early 2019 is when you're going to see competition in blockchain banks, period. I think the cryptocurrency community is tired of asking for permission for transactions where at the same time the traditional banks are investing in those types of technology companies. And I think there are a lot of offerings, I think, which is what you're getting at, who are on the hunt and they're going to start to crack that nut. So offerings like Bank Era, Polybius, I saw another offering recently, Arise Bank. These are offerings which are claiming to be dedicated to be offering a hybrid model of blockchain and traditional banking. And I think we're going to see it in 2019.
I think it's going mainstream. I think if we sat here 2 or 3 years ago at the blockchain event and said that we're going to be looking at futures at the end of 2017. And hopefully ETFs at some point in the not too distant future if the community can answer all the questions correctly to the SEC, then we would have been amazed. And I think the momentum that's behind the technology now is, notwithstanding the crash in the market in the last few weeks, I think that will recover. But the unremitting and unrelenting drive of the technology, I think, is actually going to do it. For this technology. So, for instance, everybody is focused on, it's almost like an opiate. Everybody looking at the price of Bitcoin every 5 seconds. It's less about the actual valuation. It's more about the value of the technology. And I think ultimately, people have to stop and ask themselves the question: do you actually think that a piece of technology that can transfer value around the world frictionlessly without the need for a third-party bank or institution, do you think that's awesome or not? I happen to think it's awesome. I think that a lot of the teething problems that we're actually seeing now, particularly the debate and of course the civil war last year in the community around the capacity of the block size and scaling, I think all of those things will be dealt with and will be cured and dealt with over time.
So Letitia, I see you jumping in here.
Yes. For me, I view it from an infrastructure point of view because I think at the moment there is really a lack of infrastructure which is robust and stable for a lot of multi-currencies, cryptocurrencies to exist on. So, for example, the likes of Kraken, which break down very regularly, Bitfinex, they have capacity, they have to hold their capacity, etc. But I think it's interesting what's happening in terms of companies like Ripple, who are really trying to build a platform. And as much as they have their own currency, actually what's really interesting about them as a business is that they also have a platform which is secure, robust, and actually many banks are starting to use that now. And I think it will be interesting to see other firms or other projects like Hyperledger, etc., starting to move into the space of not only being a payments platform, but also being an infrastructure which will enable other activities like banking, like settlements, like clearing, etc. So I see it moving in that direction a little bit.
So without trying to offend the cryptographers in the community, I'm going to use the word blockchain technology, not meaning that there's one blockchain. I understand there are many, but I'm asking generally, in light of some of the problems we've seen, there are arguments that the Bitcoin blockchain is slow, the Ethereum blockchain may not be as fast as need be. People are touting Hyperledger and Ripple and Corda. Basically, you can throw a dart anywhere in this room and probably hit a different blockchain. But in general, does blockchain technology as a category have promise outside of financial services? And if it does, which industries do you think we will see it take off in?
Yeah. I think from a macro point of view, what I'm seeing in terms of my work, for the EC. There's a lot of proposals, there's a lot of projects around property ownership rights, not only within the EU, but outside of the EU, especially in emerging markets where you have traditional transparency issues around property ownership rights, and also other industries where it's very difficult to show results such as farming, agriculture. So I'm seeing a lot of applications and a lot of proposals around how to use blockchain technology to maintain transparency around traditionally non-transparent industries.
We launched our first, the world's first blockchain lottery license in October of last year. So this, for anybody that's familiar with the e-gaming or gambling online community, this is a perfect application of blockchain technology at work in an industry like e-gaming. Essentially what it does is it actually prevents fraud by deploying the technology in a particular way. So what we call provable fair gaming, so people don't get defrauded from their cash. The first application, as I say, was in lottery, but we see all sorts of other applications within the e-gaming community. So things like we heard from somebody in the esports space earlier on, casino, various other applications within the e-gaming world, I think are very, very well aligned with the technology.
Gabrielle, any thoughts?
Anywhere where there are heavy assets that could be managed digitally or that could replace a very heavy paper-based manual process, like law. Any type of legal process for e-discovery. In other words, using the technology to replace any type of heavy paper-based process, which could be exchange of documents, which could be management of IP rights. So there's a big opportunity in the music industry to manage those types of rights where you could trade those assets in a peer-to-peer way without a third-party intermediary.
Philip?
Yes, I mean, they're all fair answers and good answers, and I think that probably describes the next phase of the market's evolution. But I think if we go further than that, really, the answer is wherever your imagination takes you. And this is what most of the audience here are all about, where the killer apps are yet to be discovered. But of particular interest to us in Gibraltar is the intersection of artificial intelligence, the internet, and the blockchain. That intersection between those to come up with solutions that none of us yet have really thought about. But when they happen, you think, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that?
I'm going to leave with shipping, logistics, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, and last but not least, there's actually a consortium, our law firm is part of it, of over 20 global law firms that are focused on using blockchain in the law. So we actually are looking at how can we streamline how we service all of you and how we can cut costs. I know that you may not believe that lawyers are actually looking to cut costs, but we are.
Cut costs or replace?
No, well, I think you could also argue we're trying to be more efficient and profitable in candor. So thank you all. Any questions? I know we're about out of time. Oh, geez. Okay, front row, please. One question. I'm sorry, it's going to be the front row then.
Hello, I'm Joseph Kousle from Switzerland. One question I think most of entrepreneurs have here is, how can we avoid SEC and the Americans being a nuisance? Because we see blockchain pervasive, and considering tokens as security and not utility for us, it's just totally wrong. So how can we get out of this kind of arm wrestling?
So the question is, how, if I crystallize it down, how can we avoid the nuisance of the SEC if we're trying to do things like token offerings?
I'll take the lawyer first.
No, please. I'd love to hear what you all think.
Okay, from a Gibraltar blockchain exchange, my advice will be twofold. Firstly, seek legal counsel from us, many jurisdictions, get legal guidance on everywhere that you want to market your token. And secondly, probably avoid America.
Other comments?
Yeah, I totally agree. There are other jurisdictions. There's Africa, there's India, there's Australia. You don't have to go to America. If any jurisdiction is sleeping at the wheel, I suggest you go elsewhere.
I would say, please come to America. We do want to work with you. I mean, I have to tell you, I felt like Winston Churchill before World War II, warning people that Hitler was dangerous. When the Dow came out, people called me and said, Rick, what do you think? And I said, in America, it's a security. And people said, well, how do you figure? It's not a corporation. I said, either is a limited partnership. You know, hedge funds are LPs. It's a security. And they said, well, but it's a utility token. And I said, the SEC won't care. So when the Dow report came out, I stopped looking like Winston Churchill before World War II warning people. People said, okay, you got it right. How do we fix it? And we were telling people, do it as a security. You can do a Reg D. Filecoin raised over $150 million in a Reg D offering of a security token to accredited investors. We are helping people do Reg A offerings now, registered offerings of tokenized securities that will raise up to $50 million in America. Having been in a number of startup companies, I can tell you, $50 million, $150 million, I'll take it if I'm a private company. So there are ways to do it, but you have to think about how you're going to do it in a compliant fashion, and you're going to have to talk to the regulators about it.
Yeah, I mean, securitized tokens, the security token industry is the one that's going to be the next growth area. But I think, ICO issues have to be realistic, and as I said, there are solutions for security tokens. They will come, and it will be the next big focus for many of us here, within this room, including us as an exchange. But try not to backward engineer your token as a utility, because, as Richard was saying, it doesn't work.
Thank you all. We will be available for questions after the panel, but thank you to all my fellow panelists and to all of you.